My billionaire empire was a secret. When my husband called me a broke failure, he didn't know I signed his paycheck. They say power is silent, but today, it's going to scream. Mark thinks he's signing a promotion, he's actually signing his own death warrant. While he's dreaming of a penthouse, I'm draining every cent he's ever touched. He's about to realize the mouse he's been cheating on doesn't just own the house, she owns him. By midnight, his life is over. The only question is, will he realize it before the police kick in the door? They say everything is bigger in Texas. The egos. The heat. The sprawling horizons that promise you everything while the dust chokes the life out of you. I've lived in the state my entire life, but for the last 7 years, I've lived in a very specific kind of Texas. The kind with manicured lawns, white picket fences that feel like cage bars, and the suffocating smell of lemon wax and pot roast. My name is Clara. And to my husband, Mark, I am a failure. To my mother-in-law, Evelyn, I am a charity case, a girl from the Dust Bowl side of the family who managed to snag a rising star in the corporate world. To our neighbors in this wealthy enclave of North Dallas, I am the quiet wife who gardens too much and speaks too little. The one who wears the floral thrift store dresses because she doesn't have the eye for high fashion. They look at me and they see a void. A zero. A woman who couldn't even finish her degree before she settled into the easy life of being a housewife. If only they knew. Before we dive into the wreckage of my marriage, before I show you how I systematically dismantled the lives of the people who tried to break me, I have to ask you something. Look at your screen. Look at that subscribe button. Most people see it and hesitate. They're afraid of commitment. They're afraid of the truth. If you're one of those people, if you're someone who would rather stay blind than see the world for what it really is, then go ahead. Leave a comment. Lament about why you're choosing to stay a spectator in your own life. But if you want to see how a billion-dollar empire is built in the shadows, stay with me. It was 6:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was at the stove, stirring a sauce I didn't care about. I've become an expert at pretending to care about the mundane. I spend my mornings analyzing global logistics and my afternoons deciding between oregano or basil. It's a specialized kind of torture. Mark walked in. He didn't look at me. He never looks at me anymore, not really. He looks through me, the way you look through a window to see if the mail has arrived. To him, I'm just part of the furniture. Efficient. Silent. Unchanging. Is dinner ready? He asked, his voice tight with the stress of a man who thinks he's the only one working in this house. 5 minutes, I said softly. I kept my back to him. In my head, I was thinking about the acquisition of a tech firm in Austin. The deal was worth $90 million. I had authorized the final signature via an encrypted link while I was waiting for the pasta water to boil. Evelyn called, Mark said, pulling out a chair. The wood scraped against the tile, a harsh, jagged sound. She's hosting the pre-gala brunch on Saturday. She says you need to be there early to help with the catering. And for God's sake, Clara, try to look presentable. I turned around then. I wiped my hands on my apron, an apron with little embroidered chickens on it. A gift from Evelyn. A subtle jab at my rural roots. Presentable? I asked, my voice tilting with a practiced, naive curiosity. Mark sighed, a long, theatrical sound of a man burdened by a slow-witted wife. The Miller Gala is in 2 weeks. It's the biggest event of the year. Every partner at the firm will be there. I'm in the running for senior vice president, Clara. I can't have you showing up in whatever it is you usually wear. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a gold-embossed envelope. He didn't hand it to me, he tossed it on the counter. It slid across the stone and stopped right next to a splash of tomato sauce. The Miller Gala, he repeated. The glass house. Do you even know what that is? I stared at the envelope. The glass house. I knew exactly what it was. I bought the land it sat on 3 years ago. I hired the architect. I chose the specific type of reinforced, low-iron glass so the sunset would reflect off the facade like a dying star. It was the crown jewel of my real estate portfolio. And my husband was inviting me to it as if I were a guest in my own heart. "I've heard of it," I said, my voice barely a breath. "Good. Don't embarrass me." He stood up and walked toward the stairs, leaving the invitation in the sauce. He didn't see the way my grip tightened on the wooden spoon until my knuckles turned white. He didn't see the fire in my eyes, because he never bothered to look. But that wasn't the moment I decided to destroy him. That moment came later that night. At midnight, the house was silent. Mark was snoring, the heavy, rhythmic sleep of a man who believes he is entirely safe. I slipped out of bed, my feet familiar with every floorboard that didn't creak. I didn't put on shoes. I walked out the back door and across the damp grass to the gardening shed at the edge of the property. To anyone else, it was a shed full of rusted shears and bags of potting soil. To me, it was my command center. Under the floor, tucked into a waterproof, fireproof safe, sat a laptop that cost more than Mark's BMW. I opened it. The glow of the screen hit my face, casting a blue light over the floral pattern of my nightgown. Log in. Aegis North Holdings. Current valuation, $1.2 billion. Liquid assets, $400 million. I navigated through the subdirectories. I wasn't looking at my spreadsheets tonight. I was looking at Mark. 3 months ago, I had placed a silent tracker on his accounts. Not because I was a jealous wife, I'd stopped feeling jealousy for Mark years ago. I did it because I'm a businesswoman. And in business, you always monitor your liabilities. Mark was a liability. I clicked on his recent transactions. There it was. A payment to a boutique jeweler in Highland Park. $12,000 for a diamond necklace. I checked our joint account. The money hadn't come from there. He was skimming from his bonus account, an account he thought I didn't know about. Then, I saw the emails. He wasn't just cheating. He was preparing. He had been forwarding my medical records he had falsified with the help of a shady doctor, to a lawyer named Sterling Vance. Vance was a shark known for one thing, stripping wives of their assets during contested divorces. They were building a case for my mental instability. They wanted to prove that I was unfit to manage my own inheritance, the $50,000 my grandmother had left me in a trust. They were going through all this trouble for $50,000. I sat there, in the dark, surrounded by the smell of fertilizer and damp wood, and I laughed until my ribs ached. He wanted to steal a puddle, not realizing he was standing in the middle of an ocean I controlled. But then, I scrolled further down. I saw a draft of a letter. It wasn't to a lawyer. It was to his mother, Evelyn. "Don't worry, Mom. Once the papers are served at the gala, she'll be out of the house by morning. We'll have the inheritance, and Sarah can move in by the end of the month. The mouse won't even know what hit her." My blood didn't boil. It turned to liquid nitrogen. I didn't cry. Tears are for people who have no power. I had all the power in the world, I just hadn't used it yet. You see, Mark forgot one thing. He works for Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized firm that specializes in corporate law. He thinks he's a big fish. He doesn't know that Henderson and Associates is a subsidiary of Vanguard Group. And Vanguard Group is owned by a shell company called Lumina Lux. And I am the sole board member of Lumina Lux. I could have fired him with a single keystroke. I could have ended his career before the sun came up. But that would be too quick. Too mercy-filled. If Mark wanted to serve me divorce papers at the Miller Gala, the most public, humiliating stage possible, then I would give him a show he would never forget. I opened a secure chat window with my chief of staff, Marcus. Clara, the text flashed back instantly. It's 1 a.m. in Texas. Is there an emergency? I need a full audit on the Miller Charity Fund, I typed. I suspect Evelyn Henderson is using the gala funds for personal expenses. I also need the deed to the property adjacent to Evelyn's estate in Austin. Consider it done, Marcus replied. And regarding your husband's promotion? I paused. I looked at the little embroidered chickens on my apron. Let him think he has it, I typed. In fact, tell the firm to give him a temporary raise. I want him to feel invincible. I want him to spend every cent he thinks he has. I want him to buy that diamond necklace for his mistress on credit. And the divorce papers he's preparing? I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Let him serve them. But make sure the press is there. Not for him. For me. I closed the laptop and tucked it back into the floorboards. As I walked back to the house, the rain started to fall, a cold, Texas deluge. I stood in it for a moment, letting the water soak through my nightgown, washing away the smell of lemon wax and pot roast. The Clara they knew was already dead. They just hadn't seen the body yet. The next morning, I was back in the kitchen. I was wearing the beige dress Evelyn had bought me. It was itchy and made me look sallow. Mark came down, whistling. He looked at me and smirked. You look like you, he said, reaching for the coffee. Listen, I'm going to be late tonight. Big meeting about the VP position. Don't wait up. Of course, Mark, I said, my voice sweet and hollow. I'll just stay here and work on my garden. He patted my cheek, a condescending, dismissive gesture, and walked out the door. I watched his car pull out of the driveway. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter. Perfect. The game had officially begun. They thought they were the players, and I was the board. They didn't realize that I own the table, the chairs, and the house the game is being played in. Over the next few days, I would watch them. I would watch Evelyn plan her gala with stolen money. I would watch Mark lie to my face while he texted his mistress. I would watch them build their mountain of lies, higher and higher. And then, I would pull the thread. But first, I had to go shopping. Not for a dress. I had to buy a bank. Because if you're going to ruin a man's life, you don't start with his heart. You start with his wallet. Power isn't about shouting. It isn't about making a scene or throwing a tantrum. Real power is silent. It's the invisible hand that tilts the floor just enough so that your enemy loses his balance, but never understands why. Mark spent Wednesday morning preening. I watched him in the mirror as he straightened his silk tie, a tie I bought him for our anniversary 3 years ago. Back then, I still wanted him to succeed for us. Now, I just wanted him to feel tall so that the fall would be longer. I have a meeting with the managing partner today, Clara, he said, checking his teeth in the reflection. If this goes the way I think it will, we're moving to the estate in Preston Hollow by winter. You won't have to worry about your little gardening budget anymore. I stood in the doorway, holding a basket of laundry. The perfect picture of a domestic failure. That sounds wonderful, Mark, I said, my voice thin and fragile. I just hope you're not taking on too much. You've been so stressed lately. He laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. Stress is for people who can't handle the heat. I'm built for this. No, Mark. You were built by me. You just didn't read the fine print on the contract. By 10 a.m., Mark was sitting in the mahogany-clad boardroom of Henderson and Associates. He thought he was there to discuss his ascension to senior vice president. He thought the heavy atmosphere was a sign of his growing importance. What he didn't know was that 3 floors above him, in a secure office that didn't appear on the building's directory, my chief of staff, Marcus, was on a video call with me. I wasn't in a floral dress anymore. I was in my study, the door locked, wearing a charcoal silk robe that cost more than Mark's car. "The trap is set," Marcus said, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "I've authorized the temporary incentive program for his department. On paper, it looks like a reward for his recent performance. In reality, it's a high-interest bridge loan disguised as a bonus." "Explain the mechanics," I said, leaning back. "We're giving him a $300,000 advance on his VP commission," Marcus explained. "But the fine print, which he won't read because he's too blinded by the zeros, contains a clawback clause. If he is terminated for cause, or if he fails to meet a specific, impossible metric by the end of the month, he owes the full amount back. With 20% interest. Compounded daily." I watched the live feed from the boardroom. I saw Mark's face light up as the managing partner, a man who unknowingly receives his quarterly directives from my holding company, pushed a document across the table. Mark didn't even reach for his reading glasses. He just grabbed the gold fountain pen and signed his life away. "He signed it," I whispered. "He did," Marcus replied. "And he just used 50,000 of it to pay off the retainer for Sterling Vance, the lawyer who's helping him divorce you." I felt a cold shiver of satisfaction. Mark was using my own money to hire a man to take my money. The irony was so perfect it almost felt like art. That afternoon, I didn't stay home. I drove to a small, nondescript cafe in the Arts District. I wasn't there to eat. I was there to observe. 2 tables away sat Sarah. She was younger than me, or at least she worked harder to look it. She had the kind of polished, aggressive beauty that men like Mark think they deserve. She was wearing the diamond necklace I'd seen on the bank statement. It caught the light, mocking me. I looked at her and I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, detached curiosity. Did she know she was a pawn? Did she know that Mark was telling her the same lies he'd told me 7 years ago? That she was his soulmate? That he was trapped in a marriage with a woman who didn't understand him? I pulled up my phone and sent a text to an anonymous number. Within seconds, Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at it, her eyes widening. It was an anonymous tip about an opening for a luxury penthouse in the new glasshouse development, the very building Mark had mentioned. The text implied that the unit was being held for a VIP client and that she should encourage her partner to secure it before the gala. I knew Sarah. I knew her greed was even bigger than Mark's ego. She would push him. She would demand that penthouse as proof of his love. And Mark, flush with his new bonus, would say yes. He would tie himself into a $1 million lease he couldn't afford, using money he didn't actually own. I watched her type a frantic message, likely to Mark, with a predatory smile on her face. By Thursday, I was back in my mouse costume. I was at Evelyn's estate, helping her organize the seating chart for the pre-gala brunch. The house was a monument to old Texas money, heavy oil paintings, dark wood, and the lingering scent of expensive gin and desperation. "Clara, dear, you're smudging the ink," Evelyn snapped, snatching a place card from my hand. "Honestly, sometimes I wonder if you're even trying. This event is vital for Mark's career. The Miller family doesn't associate with mediocrity." "I'm sorry, Evelyn," I murmured, staring at the floor. "I'm just a little tired. Mark has been working so late." "As he should," she huffed. "He has a legacy to build. A legacy you should be grateful to be a part of. Though, between us, I think he's outgrown this little domestic phase of his life." She looked at me then, her eyes like 2 cold marbles. She wasn't just insulting me. She was testing the waters. She wanted to see if I suspected the divorce. She wanted to see if I would crawl away quietly or if I would put up a fight for my grandmother's $50,000. "Evelyn," I said, looking up with wide, watery eyes. "I just want him to be happy. Whatever it takes." She smiled, the triumphant smile of a vulture that thinks the prey has stopped breathing. "Good girl. I'm glad we understand each other." While she went to the kitchen to berate the caterers, I took a quick photo of her private ledger, which she'd carelessly left on the desk. I didn't need a forensic accountant to see the red ink. Evelyn had been borrowing from the Miller Charity Fund to pay off her own gambling debts at the high-stakes tables in Bossier City. She wasn't just a mean woman. She was a criminal. I sent the photo to Marcus. Evelyn is short $200,000 in the charity account, I whispered into the phone. The audit is scheduled for the day after the gala. Let's make sure the auditors get an anonymous tip to look specifically at the flower arrangement line items. You're destroying the whole family, aren't you? Marcus asked. There was a hint of awe in his voice. I'm not destroying anything, Marcus, I replied, watching Evelyn through the kitchen window. I'm just letting the light in. If their house is made of rot, that's not my fault. That evening, Mark came home later than usual. He smelled of expensive scotch and Sarah's perfume. He didn't even pretend to be tired. He was vibrating with a manic energy. I did it, Clara, he said, throwing his jacket on the sofa. I put a deposit down on a new place. A surprise. For us. A new place? I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. But we can't afford a new place, Mark. Our mortgage here is already so much. Don't worry your pretty little head about the numbers, he said, leaning over me. His breath was hot. I'm the SVP now. I've got it handled. In fact, I think it's time you started packing. We're going to be moving very, very soon. He went into the bathroom to shower. I sat there, in the dim light of the bedroom, and looked at the divorce papers I knew were hidden in his briefcase downstairs. He thought he was moving to a penthouse with Sarah. He thought he was taking my inheritance to fund his new life. He thought he had one. I reached out and touched the silk of my pillowcase. You're right, Mark, I whispered to the empty room. We are moving. But only one of us is going to have a roof over their head when the sun comes up. I picked up my burner phone one last time before bed. Marcus, I said. Start the short sell on Mark's firm. I want the stock price to tank the moment he's named SVP. And call the jeweler. Tell them the credit card used for the diamond necklace has been flagged for fraud. I laid back and closed my eyes. The early conflict was over. The pieces were in place. Tomorrow, the betrayal would become public. And the mouse would start to show her teeth. There is a specific kind of vertigo that comes with living a double life. It's the feeling that the floor isn't quite solid, that at any moment, a single word could send the entire architecture of your reality crashing down. I spent Friday evening at the pre-gala mixer at the Dallas Petroleum Club. I was wearing the beige dress again. It felt like a shroud. I stood in the corner, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching Mark network. To the men in the room, he was a rising star, the man who had just secured a massive incentive from the firm. To the women, he was a catch, and I was the anchor dragging him down. I could hear the whispers as I stood near the hors d'oeuvres table. Is that her? A woman in a Chanel suit whispered to her friend. The wife? She looks so plain. Like a housekeeper who wandered into the wrong room. Mark says she has anxiety issues, the other replied, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Poor man. He's so patient with her. I heard he's finally looking for a way out. I took a sip of my water. I didn't let my hand shake. I wanted to tell them that I owned the building they were standing in. I wanted to tell them that the Chanel suit was bought with a credit card that my bank had authorized. But I stayed silent. The mouse doesn't squeak when the trap is being set. The first crack appeared at 9:30 p.m. I was heading toward the restroom when a man stepped into my path. He was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a tuxedo that cost more than Mark's annual salary. It was Julian Vane, the CEO of one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. And more importantly, he was one of the 3 people in the world who knew exactly who I was. Clara, he said, his voice booming with genuine surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were in Singapore for the semiconductor merger. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Mark was standing only 10 feet away, his back turned, laughing at a joke made by his boss. Julian, I hissed, stepping closer to him, forcing a tight, panicked smile. Please. Not here. Julian's eyes narrowed, sweeping over my thrift store dress and my lack of jewelry. He was a smart man, he saw the costume for what it was. A play, then, he whispered, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial low. Is this a hostile takeover, or something more personal? Personal, I breathed. Please, Julian. To this room, I am Clara Henderson. The housewife. If you value our partnership, you will walk away and forget you saw me. Julian looked at me, then at Mark, then back at me. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. He understood. He loved the game as much as I did. Understood, Madam Chairwoman, he murmured, bowing his head just an inch. I look forward to seeing the results. He turned and walked away. But it was too late. Mark had turned around. He had seen the CEO of a global empire speaking to his failure of a wife. The car ride home was a suffocating vacuum. Mark didn't start the engine for a full minute. He just gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white in the glow of the dashboard lights. What did Julian Vane say to you? He asked. His voice was a low growl, vibrating with a mixture of suspicion and jealousy. I think he was lost, Mark, I said, my voice trembling perfectly. He asked me where the coat check was. I told him I didn't know. Mark turned to me, his eyes searching my face for a lie. He looked like he knew you, Clara. He looked at you the way people look at someone important. I'm sure he was just being polite, I whispered, looking down at my lap. He probably mistook me for one of the staff. Mark stared at me for a long beat. I could see the gears turning. He wanted to believe I was nothing. His entire ego was built on the fact that I was nothing. If I was something, then his life was a lie. Right, he finally said, shoving the car into gear. Staff. That makes sense. Don't get ideas, Clara. Men like Vane don't even see people like us. When we got home, Mark didn't go to bed. He stayed downstairs working. I didn't go to the shed. I didn't need to. I had installed a mirror app on his phone that afternoon. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, watching the screen of my tablet as he messaged Sarah. Mark, Vane talked to the mouse tonight. For a second, I thought she'd been hiding something. But she's just as pathetic as always. It was a mistake. Sarah, doesn't matter. Did you get the lease for the glass house? I want to start moving my things in on Monday. Mark signed it today. The bonus covered the first 6 months. I'm serving her the papers at the gala in front of everyone. Once she's legally unstable, her inheritance is ours. We'll be in the penthouse by Tuesday. Sarah, I can't wait to see her face when the security guards escort her out. I watched the typing bubbles disappear. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The man I had spent 7 years with wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to use the law to strip me of my dignity, my home, and the meager $50,000 he thought I had. He wanted to leave me with nothing, in the most public way possible, just to impress a woman who only loved his borrowed money. I clicked out of the messaging app and opened Mark's bank portal. Marcus, I whispered into my headset. The lease for the glass house. Who is the landlord on record? Technically? Marcus's voice crackled in my ear. It's Aegis North. You are his landlord, Clara. Good, I said. Update the lease agreement. Add a morality clause. If the tenant is found to be involved in any legal proceedings involving fraud or domestic litigation, the lease is terminated immediately. No refund on the deposit. And the diamond necklace? Let the jeweler process the payment, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. But have the delivery redirected. Don't send it to Mark's office. Send it to Evelyn's house. With a card that says, "For the woman who raised a king." Saturday morning was the pre-gala brunch. Evelyn's garden was filled with the elite of Texas. I was there, acting as a server, carrying trays of mimosas to women who didn't know my name. Evelyn was in her element, bragging about Mark's promotion. But I noticed her eyes following me. She was sharper than Mark. She had been a social climber her whole life, she knew what a mask looked like. She cornered me by the rose bushes. "Mark told me about your interaction with Julian Vane," she said, her voice like a serrated blade. "He thinks it was a mistake." "I'm not so sure." "I don't know what you mean, Evelyn," I said, keeping my head down. "You're too quiet, Clara. You've always been too quiet. People who have nothing to say usually have something to hide." She stepped closer, the smell of her gin-soaked breath hitting me. "If you're planning on making a scene at the gala, if you're planning on trying to fight the divorce, I will ruin you. I have friends in the judiciary. I will make sure you end up in a state ward." I looked up at her. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't blink. I didn't look away. "I'm not planning on making a scene, Evelyn," I said. My voice was different. It wasn't the mouse's voice. It was steady. It was heavy. The scene is already written. I'm just waiting for the curtain to rise. Evelyn recoiled as if I'd slapped her. She saw it then. The flash of the billionaire. The shadow of the empire. "What did you say?" she whispered. But before I could answer, a courier arrived at the front gate. "Delivery for Evelyn Henderson," the man called out. Everyone turned. Evelyn, eager for a distraction and a chance to show off, took the small velvet box. She opened it in front of all her friends. The diamond necklace. The $12,000 piece Mark had bought for his mistress. Evelyn gasped, her face flushing with pride. She read the card aloud, "For the woman who raised a king." The crowd oohed and awed. Mark, standing near the bar, turned pale. He knew exactly what that necklace was. And he knew it wasn't supposed to be here. He looked at me. I just smiled and offered him a mimosa. That night, the house was silent again. But the silence was different now. It was the silence of a fuse burning down. Mark was in his study, likely on the phone with the jeweler, screaming about a clerical error. I was in my shed. "Marcus," I said. "It's time. Execute the short sell on Henderson and Associates. And send the files on Evelyn's embezzlement to the Miller family's private investigator. I want them to receive it exactly 1 hour before the gala starts." "And what about you, Clara?" Marcus asked. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the beige dress hanging on a hook in the shed. I took a pair of gardening shears and began to cut it. Not into shreds, just enough to make it unwearable. "I'm going to go to a gala," I said. "Before the sun comes up, my husband will be jobless, homeless, and under arrest for fraud. My mother-in-law will be a social pariah facing 10 years in prison. And the mistress? She'll be locked out of a penthouse that was never hers to begin with. And me? I'm going to stop being the mouse." In the world of high finance, a reputation takes 20 years to build and exactly 5 minutes to destroy. My husband, Mark, spent his entire life climbing a ladder that I owned. He thought he was ascending toward the sun. He didn't realize that I was the one controlling the oxygen in the room. Monday morning. The day of the big announcement. Mark woke up early. He was whistling as he splashed expensive cologne on his neck, the scent of a man who thinks he's already won. He looked at me while I was sitting at the vanity, brushing my hair with a plastic brush I'd bought at a drugstore to maintain the failure persona. "Big day, Clara," he said, checking his reflection one last time. "By noon, I'll be the youngest senior vice president in the history of Henderson and Associates. You should go buy yourself something nice. Not that beige rag, maybe something with a little more class." He tossed a credit card onto the bed. His credit card. The one linked to the account with the bonus money that was actually a high-interest trap. "Thank you, Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling with practiced gratitude. "I'll try not to spend too much." "Spend it all," he said with a smirk. "There's plenty more where that came from." He was right. There was plenty more. But it wasn't coming to him. It was coming for him. Mark arrived at the office at 9 a.m. He expected a hero's welcome. He expected his assistants to be lined up with coffee and congratulations. Instead, he found silence. The trading floor was glued to the television screens. I had authorized the release of a special market report via Aegis North at 8:45 a.m. The report didn't mention Mark. It didn't need to. It simply pointed out a structural instability in the portfolio of Henderson and Associates' largest client. "Market analysts are calling it a black swan event," the reporter said. "The sudden devaluation of the Miller Group's holdings has sent shockwaves through the Dallas legal sector." I sat in my gardening shed, watching the live feed from the office's security cameras on my laptop. Mark was standing in the middle of the floor, his face pale. His promotion was predicated on the success of the Miller account. And I had just pulled the plug on the Miller account. Mark's boss, the managing partner, stepped out of his office. He didn't look at Mark with pride. He looked at him with the cold eyes of a man who needed someone to blame for a $50 million loss. "Henderson," the partner barked. "My office. Now." Mark followed him, his swagger gone, replaced by the twitchy gait of a man who realizes the ground is no longer solid. Inside the office, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and impending doom. "What happened to the Miller projections?" the partner asked, slamming a folder onto the desk. "You told me they were solid. You told me the audit was a formality." They were, sir," Mark stammered. "The numbers were perfect. I checked them myself." "Then explain why Aegis North just pulled their backing," the partner shouted. "And explain why the SEC just contacted us regarding irregularities in the charity fund associated with the Miller family." "Your mother's charity, Henderson." Mark's jaw dropped. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "My mother? No, there must be a mistake." "There are no mistakes in this building," the partner roared. "The board is meeting in an hour. Your SVP position isn't just on hold, Mark. It's being deleted. And that $300,000 advance we gave you? We need it back. By the end of the week." I watched Mark through the camera. He looked small. He looked like the failure he had always accused me of being. But I wasn't done. I picked up my phone and called the boutique jeweler. "Hello," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I'm calling on behalf of Mark Henderson. He's concerned about a fraudulent charge on his card for a diamond necklace. Yes, he'd like to report the recipient, Sarah Miller, as being in possession of stolen property." I hung up. By 2 p.m., Mark was back in the lobby, his belongings in a cardboard box. He hadn't been fired, not yet, but he had been indefinitely suspended pending the investigation into his mother's embezzlement. His phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Mark! Where are you?" her voice screamed through the receiver. "The police are here. They're at my apartment. They say the necklace is stolen. And the leasing office at the glass house just called. They said my keycard is deactivated." Mark slumped against a marble pillar. Sarah, listen to me, there's a misunderstanding. The firm, the money. What money, Mark? She hissed. I just tried to use the emergency credit card you gave me. It was declined. At a restaurant. In front of my friends. I'll fix it, Mark whispered. I'll talk to Clara. She has that inheritance. I'll make her sign it over today. You better, Sarah said, her voice turning cold. Because if I go to jail for that necklace, I'm taking you down with me. I sat on the porch of our house, watching him pull into the driveway. He looked aged. He looked broken. I stood up, smoothing out my floral dress. I put on my concerned wife face. The mask was heavy, but I was an expert at wearing it. Mark? I said as he walked up the path. What's wrong? Why are you home so early? He looked at me, and for the first time in years, there was no contempt in his eyes. There was only desperation. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip tight and painful. Clara, he gasped. I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to the bank. Right now. The bank? I asked, my voice trembling. Mark, you're hurting me. What's happened? The firm, there was a glitch, he lied, his eyes darting around. My accounts are frozen temporarily. I need that $50,000 from your grandmother's trust. I need it today, Clara. It's the only way to save our future. But, that was for my retirement, I whispered. You said we would never touch it. I don't care what I said, he screamed, his face turning red. Do you want us to be homeless? Do you want to go back to living in a trailer? Sign the papers, Clara. Sign them now. He pulled a crumpled set of documents from his briefcase. They weren't just for the inheritance. Tucked behind them were the divorce papers. He was so panicked he didn't even realize he was showing me his exit strategy. I looked at the papers. I looked at the man I had once loved. I could see the exit strategy folder in his mind. He wanted my $50,000 to pay off his mistress's legal fees and his own debt, so he could leave me for good. Of course, Mark, I said, reaching for his pen. If it will save us. I'll sign anything. I signed the papers. But I didn't sign my name. I signed the name of the holding company that owned his debt. In legal terms, I had just purchased his liability. He didn't owe the firm anymore. He owed me. He grabbed the papers and kissed my forehead, a hollow, lying kiss. I'll be back late, he said, already running toward his car. I have to go, settle some things. I watched him drive away. I pulled my burner phone out of my apron pocket. Marcus, I said. He has the papers. He's heading to his lawyer's office to file the emergency transfer. Alert the bank to flag the transaction as a high-level fraud attempt. And call the police. Tell them a man fitting Mark's description is attempting to launder stolen corporate funds. I sat back down in my rocking chair. The conflict wasn't deepening anymore. It was concluding. Tomorrow was the Miller Gala. The night the glass house would be filled with the most powerful people in Texas. And I was going to be the guest of honor. They say that when you're drowning, the first thing you lose is your sense of direction. You claw at the water, thinking it's the surface, only to realize you're digging your own grave in the silt. Mark and Evelyn were finally underwater. And I was the one holding the anchor. Tuesday evening. The air in the house was thick, like the moments before a tornado touches down. I was sitting in the living room, knitting a sweater I would never finish. It was part of the act. The clueless wife waiting for her husband to come home and save the day. The front door burst open. It wasn't Mark. It was Evelyn. She looked like a ghost that had been dragged through a briar patch. Her expensive silk blouse was stained with sweat, and her hair, usually a rigid helmet of perfection, was beginning to fray. "Where is he?" she hissed, slamming her purse onto the coffee table. "Where is my son, Clara?" "He's at work, Evelyn," I said, my voice small and trembling. "He said he had a big meeting." "Work?" she laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound. "He doesn't have a job, you simpleton. The firm escorted him out 4 hours ago. And the charity, the auditors are at my house. They're asking about the flower budget." "The flower budget?" I stood up, letting the knitting needles clatter to the floor. "I don't understand. Mark said everything was fine. He said we were moving to the glass house." "There is no glass house," Evelyn screamed. She stepped toward me, her eyes wild. "The lease was revoked this afternoon. Something about a morality clause. Now, tell me, did Mark get the papers? Did you sign over the trust?" Before I could answer, Mark stumbled into the house. He looked worse than Evelyn. He was holding the folder I had signed earlier, but he was shaking so hard the papers were fluttering like dying birds. "It's gone," he whispered, staring at me. "Clara, the bank. They said the account is flagged. They said the signature on the trust doesn't match the record." "But I signed it, Mark," I said, moving toward him, my eyes wide with fake innocence. "I signed exactly where you told me to. They wouldn't even let me leave the building through the front door." Mark roared, throwing the folder at my feet. "They said there's an investigation into elderly exploitation and fund diversion." "Clara, what did you do?" I didn't do anything," I whispered. I leaned down and picked up the folder. I pulled out the document I had signed. "I just signed the name you always called me." Mark snatched the paper from my hand. He looked at the signature line. I hadn't signed Clara Henderson. I hadn't even signed Clara Smith. In elegant, razor-sharp script, I had signed, "The Landlord." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stared at the word. He looked at it for a long time, his brain refusing to process the reality. "The Landlord?" he whispered. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" "It's no joke, Mark," I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. It dropped an octave. It became cold. It became the voice of the woman who owned the sky. "I told you I'd sign anything to save us. But us ended the moment you hired a lawyer to steal from a woman you thought was too stupid to notice." Evelyn was the first to react. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You little bitch. You've been playing us. You've had money this whole time? Where is it? Give it to us, or I swear to God." "You'll what, Evelyn?" I asked, looking her dead in the eye. "Call your friends in the judiciary? The ones who are currently signing the warrant for your arrest for the embezzlement of $3 million from the Miller charity?" Evelyn's grip loosened. Her face went from red to a sickly, translucent white. "How do you know about that?" she breathed. "I don't just know about it," I said, stepping back and smoothing my dress. "I'm the one who audited you. I'm the one who bought the Miller Group's debt. Which means, technically, you didn't steal from a charity. You stole from me." Mark looked at the lights, then at me. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "Clara, honey, we can talk about this," he stammered, his voice cracking. I was just stressed. "Sarah, she meant nothing. I was doing it for us. To get us ahead." "You weren't getting us ahead, Mark," I said, walking toward the window to watch the officers step out of their cruisers. "You were just decorating your cage. And now, the door is locking. Police! Open up!" Mark scrambled toward the back door, but I didn't move. "The back gate is locked, Mark," I said calmly. "And the security team I hired is standing on the other side. There's nowhere to go. Evelyn collapsed onto the sofa, the same sofa she had once told me was too expensive for my taste. She started to sob, not out of guilt, but out of the sheer horror of being caught. I opened the front door. 2 officers stood there, followed by a man in a plain suit. Detective Miller. Clara Henderson, the detective asked. Yes, I said softly. My husband and mother-in-law are in the living room. I believe you have some questions regarding the Vanguard audit and the Miller charity funds. The officers moved past me. They didn't even look at me, I was just the helpful, grieving wife. They headed straight for Mark, who was cowering behind the kitchen island. Mark Henderson? You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and attempted money laundering, the officer said, clicking the handcuffs into place. Mark looked at me as they led him toward the door. Clara! Tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them about the inheritance. The inheritance is safe, Mark, I said, watching him be pushed into the night air. It's exactly where it belongs. Evelyn was led out next. She didn't scream. She just stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. You think you've won? She whispered as she passed. You're still nothing. You're still just a girl from the dirt. Maybe, I said, leaning against the doorframe. But I own the dirt now, Evelyn. And I'm burying your legacy in it. The house was empty. The blue and red lights were gone. The neighbors were peeking through their curtains, their mouths agape, watching the golden boy of the neighborhood being taken away in the back of a squad car. I walked back into the kitchen. I picked up the folder Mark had thrown. I looked at the divorce papers. I took a lighter from the drawer, the one I used to light the candles for the dinners Mark never appreciated. I held the flame to the corner of the papers. I watched the names Mark and Sarah turn to ash in the sink. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. The press is ready for the gala tomorrow. Your wardrobe has been delivered to the glass house. Shall I send the car at 7? I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. I wasn't wearing the floral dress anymore. I had ripped it off the moment the police left. I was standing there in my slip, my skin cold, my heart finally quiet. No car, I whispered to the empty room. I'll drive myself. I want to see the look on their faces when I walk through the front door. I went up to our bedroom. I looked at the bed we had shared for 7 years. I felt a momentary pang of something, not regret, but a ghostly memory of the woman I used to be. The woman who actually loved the man who just tried to ruin her. But then I remembered the diamond necklace. I remembered the mental instability files. I remembered the way they laughed at me at the brunch. The mouse was gone. She had been eaten by the world. I opened my closet and pushed aside the rows of beige and floral. At the very back, hidden behind a false panel, was a garment bag I hadn't opened in years. I unzipped it. The light hit the fabric, midnight blue silk, woven with actual silver thread. It was the dress I had commissioned when I made my first 100 million. It was the dress of a queen. Tomorrow, the Miller Gala begins. Tomorrow, Mark will be calling from a jail cell, hoping I'll post his bail. Tomorrow, Sarah will realize her penthouse has a new lock. And tomorrow, the world will finally meet the woman who signed their death warrants. If you aren't ready for the reveal, leave now. But if you want to see the crown being placed, stay. There is no smell quite like a county jail. It's a mixture of floor wax, old sweat, and the sour tang of broken dreams. It's a place designed to strip you of your identity, to turn you into a number, a body, a problem to be filed away. Wednesday morning. The sun was shining over Dallas, but inside the visitation room, the light was fluorescent and cruel. I sat behind the reinforced glass, waiting. I wasn't wearing floral today. I was wearing a tailored black suit, the kind that screams litigation. Mark was led into the room. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 hours. His hair was a mess, his orange jumpsuit was 2 sizes too large, and his eyes were bloodshot. When he saw me, a flicker of hope, disgusting, pathetic hope, lit up his face. "Clara," he gasped, grabbing the phone on his side of the glass. "Thank God. Did you talk to the lawyer? Did you get the bail money? There's been a massive mistake, honey. The firm, they're framing me. It's all a misunderstanding about the Miller account." I picked up the receiver. I didn't press it to my ear immediately. I just looked at him. "Clara? Say something." Mark pleaded, his hand pressed against the glass. "I know I was hard on you. I know the divorce papers, they were just a scare tactic, I swear. I wanted us to start fresh. I was going to tell you at the gala. We can fix this. Just use the trust money. Please." "The trust money is gone, Mark," I said. My voice was flat. No tremor. No tears. "What?" "No, you said you signed it. You signed the transfer." "I signed it over to the holding company that owns your debt," I said calmly. "Technically, the $50,000 moved from my left pocket to my right pocket. It didn't go to your lawyer. It went to me." Mark froze. He squinted at me through the glass, as if trying to see a stranger through a familiar face. "What are you talking about? What holding company?" "Aegis North, Mark. I believe you've spent the last 3 years trying to get a meeting with their board." Mark's hand slid down the glass. "How do you know about Aegis North?" "Because I am the board, Mark. I am the chairwoman. I am the landlord you signed that lease with. And I am the reason you're sitting in that orange suit." Mark started to laugh, a high, wheezing sound. "You? A chairwoman? Clara, you can't even balance a checkbook. You spend your days weeding the garden and burning pot roast. You're a failure. Everyone says so. Evelyn says so." "Evelyn says what I want her to say," I replied. "I let you both believe I was a failure because it made you comfortable. It made you predictable. A man who thinks his wife is a zero doesn't hide his tracks. He leaves his laptop open. He leaves his mistress's texts on the dashboard. He embezzles from a charity because he thinks no one is smart enough to catch him." I leaned in closer to the glass. "I bought your firm 6 months ago, Mark. I've been your boss for 2 fiscal quarters. I watched you skim. I watched you lie. And I watched you plan to leave me with nothing. I didn't lose my degree, Mark. I finished it in secret, 3 years before we met. I have an MBA from Wharton and a PhD in applied economics. While you were at the gym, I was executing hostile takeovers from the gardening shed." Mark's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions, denial, confusion, and finally, a soul-crushing realization. He looked at my hands, my manicured, steady hands, and then back at my eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "If you had all that, why stay with me? Why play this game for 7 years?" "Because I loved you," I said. And for the first time, my voice cracked, just a little. I wanted to see if the man I married was still in there. I wanted to see if, given the chance to be a partner, you would take it. But you didn't want a partner, Mark. You wanted a servant. You wanted a mirror that only showed you how great you were. Before I show you the moment his heart actually broke, I want you to look at your own life. Are you being underestimated? Are you the one everyone assumes is just a background character? If you aren't subscribed, you're letting them keep you in the background. If you're staying for the revenge, tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you'd do if you had $1 billion and a secret? Because Mark is about to find out that money can't buy mercy. "Clara, please," Mark sobbed, the tears finally falling. "I'm sorry. I'll do anything. I'll testify against my mother. I'll tell them everything. Just get me out of here. We can be a power couple. Think of what we could do together. We are together, Mark, I said. In a way. You're my tenant. And as of this morning, I've started the eviction process on our house. Not because I need the money, but because I'm turning the lot into a public park. I'm going to name it after my grandmother. The woman whose $50,000 you tried to steal. You're destroying our home, he gasped. It was never a home, Mark. It was a set. And the show is over. I pulled a small, translucent photo from my pocket and pressed it against the glass. It was a picture of Sarah, being led out of her apartment in handcuffs, her face streaked with mascara. She's in the women's wing, I said. She's already told the police that the fraud was your idea. She's trading you for a plea deal. Just like you were going to trade me for a penthouse. Mark slumped in his chair, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. He was a vacuum of a man, his ego finally deflated. What happens to me now? He asked, his voice muffled against the wood. You go to trial, I said. And because I own the firm you defrauded, I will be the lead witness. I have 7 years of records, Mark. Every dinner you wrote off as a business expense. Every bonus you took. You're looking at 15 years. Minimum. Time's up, the guard barked. I stood up. I smoothed my jacket. I felt light. I felt as if a weight I'd been carrying for a decade had finally been lifted. Clara! Mark screamed as the guard pulled him back. Clara, don't leave me here. I love you. I still love you. I didn't turn back. I walked through the heavy steel doors, through the security checkpoint, and out into the bright, hot Texas sun. My black SUV was waiting at the curb. Marcus opened the door for me. How was he? Marcus asked. He was exactly who I thought he was, I said, sliding into the leather seat. Small. The Miller Gala starts in 4 hours, Madam Chairwoman, Marcus said, checking his watch. The press is already gathered at the Glass House. They're expecting a statement from the owner regarding the Henderson scandal. I looked at my reflection in the tinted window. The mouse was dead. The failure was gone. Let's give them something to write about, I said. As the car pulled away, I saw a lone floral dress lying in a trash can near the jail entrance. The stage was set. The audience was waiting. And tonight, I wasn't just attending the gala. I was the one turning out the lights. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But they're wrong. Cold is for amateurs. Cold is for people who want to feel something. Real revenge, the kind that erases a person from the map, is clinical. It's a series of math problems solved in the dark. For hours until the Miller Gala. I was standing in a private suite at the Jewel Hotel, looking out over the Dallas skyline. On the bed behind me lay the midnight blue dress, shimmering like a bruised sky. Marcus stood by the door, his tablet glowing. The SEC has officially frozen Evelyn's personal accounts. She's currently trying to call her friends in the state legislature, but strangely, none of them are picking up. Because I bought their campaign debt this morning, I said, not turning around. In Texas, loyalty is a commodity. And I just cornered the market. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. We finished the deep dive into Mark's encrypted exit strategy folder. There was a hidden partition. He wasn't just planning a divorce, Clara. He was planning a hostile takeover of your grandmother's land rights. I turned around. Grandmother's land? That's just a few acres of scrub brush in West Texas. It's worthless. That's what he told you, Marcus said, handing me the tablet. But look at the geological survey Mark commissioned 6 months ago. He used your own signature to authorize the drones. They found a lithium deposit, one of the largest in the continental U.S. I stared at the screen. The maps were glowing with heat signatures. Mark hadn't just been cheating on me with a woman, he'd been cheating on me with my own heritage. He knew that $50,000 trust sat on top of a 9-figure fortune. He wasn't just trying to leave me, he was trying to rob me of the one thing I had left from my family. He was going to declare me mentally unfit, seize the land, and sell the rights to a competitor, I whispered. He was going to bury me in an institution while he sat on a throne made of my grandmother's dirt. The betrayal finally had a shape. It wasn't just lust or ego. It was a calculated attempt to erase my future. I felt a coldness settle into my marrow. I had been playing a game of chess, but Mark had been trying to set the board on fire. Who is he selling the rights to? I asked. That's the strange part, Marcus said. The buyer was Vane-Tech, Julian Vane's company. I barely had time to process Julian's name before the door to the suite opened. Julian Vane stepped in. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo yet. He was in a simple black sweater, looking more like a shark than a CEO. He looked at Marcus, then at me. "Leave us," Julian said. It wasn't a request. Marcus looked at me for confirmation. I nodded. When the door clicked shut, Julian walked to the window and stood beside me. "You knew," I said. "You were the one Mark was talking to." "Mark is a small man who thinks he's a giant because he found a map," Julian said, his voice gravelly and calm. "He approached me 3 months ago. He offered me the lithium rights in exchange for a seat on my board and a clean divorce from his unstable wife." "And you said yes?" I felt the urge to strike him. "I said I would consider it," Julian replied. He turned to face me, his eyes piercing. "Because I wanted to see what the mouse of North Dallas would do. I've known you for a long time, Clara. I knew you didn't build Aegis North by being a victim. I knew you were waiting. I just didn't know if you were waiting for a reason, or for a target." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "Mark thinks I'm his buyer," Julian whispered. "But he's a fool. I don't buy from thieves. I buy from owners. Everything on this drive is the recorded evidence of his attempt to defraud you of those land rights. I've been recording every meeting. Every bribe he offered. Every lie he told." I took the drive from his hand. "Why give this to me? You could have let him execute the fraud and then squeezed him for the rights." "Because I want the lithium," Julian said simply. "But I want it legally. And I want to partner with someone who has the stomach to do what's necessary. Mark is a coward. He would have folded the moment the SEC knocked. You've been living in a cage for 7 years just to watch your enemies rot. That's the kind of partner I want." I looked at the drive, then back at Julian. "I'm not a partner, Julian," I said. "I'm the owner. If we do this, it's on my terms. I want Vane-Tech to provide the infrastructure, but the land stays in the Henderson name. My name. Not Mark's." "Agreed," Julian said. He held out a hand. "But first, we have a gala to attend. And I believe you have a speech to give." The transformation was complete. I stood before the full-length mirror. The midnight blue dress fit like a second skin. It caught the light of the setting Texas sun, reflecting back a deep, cosmic glow. I wore no necklace, just the simple, gold band my grandmother had left me. I looked at my face. The softness was gone. The mouse had been replaced by something ancient and unforgiving. For 7 years, I had made myself small. I had let them laugh. I had let them talk down to me. I had cooked their meals and cleaned their floors and listened to their lies. No more. I picked up my phone. One last call. "Detective Miller?" I said. I have additional evidence regarding my husband's attempted land fraud. It involves a hidden lithium deposit and a conspiracy to commit identity theft. I'll be handing it to you tonight. In front of the cameras. At the gala, Mrs. Henderson, the detective asked, sounding surprised. No, I said, looking at my reflection. At my house. The glass house. I walked out of the suite. Julian was waiting in the hallway, looking every bit the billionaire titan he was. He offered me his arm. Ready to break the internet, Clara? He asked. I don't care about the internet, Julian, I said, stepping into the elevator. I just want to see the look on Evelyn's face when she realizes the girl from the dirt is the one who owns the shovel. The elevator doors closed. The planning was over. The secret was out. The prey was in the trap, and the lioness was finally awake. Tonight, the glass house wouldn't just be a venue. It would be a courtroom. And I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The glass house was exactly as I had designed it. A transparent fortress. A place where there are no corners to hide in, no shadows to crawl into. Tonight, it was filled with the elite of Texas, the same people who had snickered behind their hands when I'd tripped over my words at last year's fundraiser. I sat in the back of the black SUV, watching the flashbulbs pop at the entrance. I could see the Miller family, looking tense but dignified, trying to distance themselves from the Henderson scandal that was already breaking on the news. I could see the partners from Mark's firm, whispering in tight circles. Are you ready? Julian asked beside me. I've been ready for 7 years, Julian, I said. I'm just enjoying the view before I change it. The valet opened the door. I stepped out. The midnight blue silk of my dress caught the floodlights, shimmering like oil on water. I didn't look down. I didn't look shy. I walked with the stride of a woman who knew she owned every square inch of the marble beneath her heels. I heard the gasps. Is that Clara? No, it can't be. Look at the way she's carrying herself. Where did she get that dress? That's a custom piece. I ignored them. I walked straight past the check-in desk. The girl at the counter started to ask for my invitation, then saw my face and froze. She knew. She had seen the payroll. I reached the center of the ballroom. In the middle of the floor stood the partners of Henderson and Associates. They were surrounding a man who was supposed to be the new SVP. I walked straight into their circle. Good evening, gentlemen, I said. My voice was low, but it carried through the room like a bell. The managing partner, a man who had once called me the help to my face, stared at me as if I were a ghost. Clara? What are you doing here? And why are you with Julian Vane? I'm not with Julian, I said, tilting my head. Julian is with me. And as for why I'm here, I believe there's a discrepancy in your firm's lease agreement that we need to discuss. Publicly. I didn't wait for his answer. I stepped up onto the small podium meant for the evening's announcements. Julian stood at the base of the stairs, a silent sentinel. May I have your attention, please? I said into the mic. The room went dead silent. Even the servers stopped moving. Most of you know me as Clara Henderson, I began. The quiet wife of a man who recently found himself in a bit of legal trouble. You've heard the rumors about fraud. You've heard about the failure of a woman who stayed by his side. I paused, scanning the room. I saw Sarah, Mark's mistress, standing near the back, having managed to get out on bail just hours ago. She was wearing a cheap knockoff dress, her eyes wide with terror. I'm here to tell you that the rumors are true, I said. There was fraud. There was a massive betrayal. But you've been looking at the wrong victim. As of 6 p.m. tonight, Henderson and Associates is no longer a tenant of the Miller Plaza. I have terminated the lease for breach of the morality clause. And since I am the primary shareholder of the debt you used to fund your recent expansion, I am calling in the loan. In full. By midnight. The managing partner turned a shade of purple I didn't know existed. You're calling in the loan? Who do you think you are? I don't think, Arthur, I said, leaning into the mic. I know. My name is Clara Smith-Ames. I am the CEO of Aegis North. And I just fired you. I stepped down from the podium. The room was no longer a gala, it was a crime scene. You can't do this. Arthur shouted, following me. We'll sue. This is a conflict of interest. Sue me with what money, Arthur? I asked, stopping and turning to face him. Your accounts were frozen 10 minutes ago. Your firm's stock just dropped 40% because I leaked the audit into your discretionary funds. You know, the ones you used to buy your mistress that condo in Cabo? His mouth snapped shut. I turned to Sarah, who was trying to slip out the side door. Sarah! I called out. She stopped, paralyzed. The police are waiting outside, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It seems Detective Miller found a few more diamond necklaces in your search record that don't belong to you. And since I own the boutique you took them from, I've decided to press charges for every single one. Sarah began to sob, her knees buckling. 2 plainclothes officers stepped out from the crowd and took her arms. This is for Mark, she screamed at me. He loved me. He never loved you. He didn't love either of us, Sarah, I said, walking past her. He just loved the idea of taking things that didn't belong to him. Just like you. I walked out onto the terrace, Julian following close behind. The city of Dallas stretched out below us, a carpet of light. Julian said, handing me a glass of champagne. Mark is in a cell, Sarah is back in cuffs, and the firm is dead. What's next, Clara? I took a sip of the drink. It was cold and crisp. The mother, I said. Evelyn is the one who taught them how to be vultures. Mark was just a student. Evelyn is the architect. She's at her estate, Julian noted. She refused to show up tonight. She thinks she can hide behind her lawyers. Let her think that, I said. I looked out at the horizon. I'm not going to her house with a lawyer. I'm going with a bulldozer. I set my glass down on the stone railing. Tonight was the minor execution. The public embarrassment. The loss of money and status. But tomorrow I go for the heart. If you thought this was the end, you don't know me yet. The glass house is still standing. But by the time I'm done, not one pane will be left unbroken. There is a specific kind of arrogance that only exists in old money. It's the belief that because your grandfather stole a mountain, you are somehow made of stone. Evelyn Henderson lived in a house built on that arrogance. A fortress of crown molding, French silk, and secrets that had been swept under the rug for 40 years. I didn't call ahead. You don't give a snake time to coil. I pulled up to the Henderson estate at 11 p.m. The lights were on in the drawing room. I could see Evelyn through the window, pacing like a caged animal, a glass of gin in her hand. She thought she was safe because she was behind a gate. She didn't realize I'd bought the security company that monitored that gate 3 hours ago. I stepped out of the SUV. I wasn't in my gala dress anymore. I was wearing a sharp, charcoal gray trench coat. I looked like the shadow of the woman she used to mock. The door opened. Evelyn stood there, her face a mask of drunk, aristocratic fury. You, she spat, the smell of gin hitting me like a physical wall. How dare you come here? I've already spoken to my attorneys. Whatever stunt you pulled at the gala won't hold up in court. You've harassed a grieving mother and an innocent man. Innocent is a strong word for someone who's currently crying in a holding cell, Evelyn, I said, stepping past her into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Get out, she shrieked. This is my home. You're nothing but a stray we took in. I stopped in the middle of her Persian rug, the one she told me I wasn't allowed to walk on with shoes. I stood firmly, my heels digging into the silk. Actually, Evelyn, I said, turning to face her. This house is currently collateral for a loan that has been defaulted on. Technically, you're the stray. And I'm the one deciding whether or not to put you out in the rain. Evelyn stared at me, her eyes bloodshot. What do you want, Clara? You've taken Mark's job. You've shamed our name. Isn't that enough for your pathetic little ego? I want to talk about the dirt, Evelyn, I said. I walked over to her mahogany desk and sat in her chair. I leaned back, crossing my legs. I want to talk about the land in West Texas. The land Mark tried to steal from my trust. Evelyn's face went pale. She tried to steady herself against a chair. That wasteland? Mark was doing you a favor. It's a tax burden. He was going to sell it to clear our family's debts. He was going to sell it to Vaintech for $200 million, I corrected her. Because he found the lithium, Evelyn. And I know you were the one who told him to look for it. You found the old geological surveys in your husband's safe, didn't you? You've known for years that my grandmother's worthless acres were a gold mine. Evelyn didn't deny it. A slow, ugly smile spread across her face. So what if I did? You would have never known. You were too busy playing house. If it weren't for us, that wealth would be rotting in the ground. We deserved it, Clara. We are the Hendersons. You are just the help. I looked at her, and for a second, I felt a flash of the old anger. But I pushed it down. Anger is a leak in the engine. I needed to be a vacuum. You deserved it? I asked softly. You deserved to falsify my medical records? To try and commit me to an asylum so you could sign my name on a deed? You deserve to ruin a woman who genuinely cared for your son? Survival of the fittest, dear, Evelyn said, walking toward the bar to pour another drink with shaking hands. You were the weak link. We were just pruning the family tree. The thing about pruning, Evelyn, I said, standing up and walking toward her, is that if you cut too deep, the whole tree dies. I've already talked to Julian Vane. He's handed over all the recordings of your meetings. Every time you talked about dealing with me. Every time you discussed the fraud. Evelyn froze. Julian wouldn't, he's one of us. Julian is a businessman, I said. And I'm the better business. But I'm feeling generous tonight. I'm going to give you a choice. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my pocket and laid it on the bar. This is a confession, I said. Sign it. Admit that the embezzlement, the land fraud, and the conspiracy against me were all your idea. Tell the police that Mark was just a pawn. If you sign it, I'll let you keep a small apartment in town. I'll even pay for your legal defense on the charity fraud charges. Evelyn looked at the paper, then at me. Her eyes narrowed. And if I don't? If you don't, I whispered, leaning in so close I could see the broken capillaries in her cheeks, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a state prison where the walls are gray and the tea is cold. I will sell this house to a developer who will turn it into a low-income housing complex. And I will make sure the name Henderson is synonymous with trash for the next 100 years. Evelyn snatched the pen. She didn't even hesitate. She signed the paper with a jagged, desperate hand. There, she hissed, shoving the paper back at me. I saved him. Now get out of my house. I picked up the paper and blew on the ink to dry it. I looked at her, and I felt a wave of cold pity. You didn't save him, Evelyn, I said. You just admitted to being the mastermind. In Texas, the mastermind gets the longest sentence. And Mark? I've already sent a copy of his exit strategy to the district attorney. He's going to testify against you to save himself. It's exactly what you taught him to do, isn't it? Survival of the fittest. Evelyn's eyes widened. She realized the trap had just closed. She hadn't signed a deal, she had signed her own warrant. You lied to me, she whimpered. I learned from the best, I said, walking toward the door. I stopped at the threshold. Oh, and Evelyn? The movers will be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. I've donated all your furniture to a local women's shelter. I'd suggest you start packing your clothes. But leave the jewelry. It was all bought with my company's dividends. I sat in the car, the confession safely in my bag. I felt nothing. No joy, no sadness. Just the quiet satisfaction of a job done well. My phone buzzed. It was Julian. Did she sign? She signed, I said. The Hendersons are officially eating each other. Mark is ready to flip on his mother, and Evelyn just gave me the evidence to bury her. Good, Julian said. The glass house is prepped for the morning press conference. The world is waiting to hear from the new owner of the Texas lithium belt. I'm ready, I said. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The lights of the Henderson estate were flickering out, one by one. The strategy had worked. The enemy had been tested and found wanting. But there was still one more person to deal with. The person who had started all of this. Mark. Because a man like Mark doesn't just go away. He festers. And I wanted to make sure that when he finally looked at me for the last time, he saw exactly what he had lost. Tonight, the empire was secure. Tomorrow, the world would know my name. They say that when you dig for lithium, you have to be careful not to hit the water table. If you puncture the Earth's skin too deep, everything you've built gets flooded. I thought I was digging for a way to bury the Hendersons. I didn't realize I was digging up my own father's grave. Wednesday, 2 a.m. I was back at the glass house, sitting in my private office on the top floor. The city of Dallas was a sea of jewels below me, but all I could look at was a single, yellowed document Julian Vane had left on my desk after our meeting. It wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a geological survey. It was a death certificate. My failure of a father, Thomas Smith, hadn't died of a heart attack in a rented apartment like the world believed. I had told Mark that story to keep him away from the truth. I had told myself that story to survive. But Julian's file showed something different. My father had been the original surveyor of the West Texas land. He hadn't been a poor farmer. He had been a genius, a man who saw the future in the dirt 40 years before the rest of us. And the man who had funded his research, the man who had eventually foreclosed on his dreams and driven him into the shadows, was Evelyn's husband. Mark's father. He didn't just marry me because I was a mouse, I whispered to the empty room. He married me because I was the only person left with the legal claim to the mineral rights. The Hendersons didn't stumble onto this secret 6 months ago. They've been hunting my family for 30 years. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My entire marriage wasn't just a betrayal, it was a long con. A generational heist. Mark hadn't found me. He had targeted me. And then, the second revelation hit. I looked at the bottom of the document. The man who had witnessed the foreclosure, the man who had signed off on the accidental death of Thomas Smith, wasn't a Henderson. It was Julian Vane's father. "You're late, Clara." I didn't turn around. I knew the voice. Julian was standing on the balcony, his silhouette framed by the moon. "You knew," I said, my voice vibrating with a lethal coldness. "You didn't help me because you wanted a partner. You helped me because your family is as guilty as the Hendersons." You wanted to make sure that when I finally found out, I was already tied to you by a billion-dollar contract. Julian stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. My father was a businessman, Clara. In the 80s, things were different. But I'm not my father. I'm the one who gave you the file. I'm the one who gave you the weapons. You gave me the weapons so I'd point them at the Hendersons instead of you. I shouted, slamming the file onto the desk. You let me marry a man who was part of the family that killed my father. Julian didn't flinch. I didn't let you do anything. You were already married when I found you. I waited until you were strong enough to handle the truth. Now, you have a choice. You can tear up the lithium deal and try to ruin me, which will take years and cost you everything, or you can use this secret to ensure that neither the Hendersons nor the Vanes ever touch a cent of that lithium again. I looked at the lithium contract. It was a partnership agreement. 50/50ths. I picked up a pen. The deal is changing, Julian, I said. Vane Tech will provide the infrastructure. You will handle the logistics. But the ownership? It won't be 50/50. It will be 90/10. My favor. And you will set up a multi-billion-dollar foundation in my father's name to provide scholarships for every child in the district where he was ruined. Julian stared at me. He was a shark, but he recognized a bigger predator when he saw one. That's a death sentence for my quarterly earnings. Better than a life sentence for your family's history, I countered. Sign it, or the morning press conference won't be about lithium. It will be about the murder of Thomas Smith. Julian took the pen. He signed. As he handed the paper back, he whispered, You really aren't the woman I met at the gala last year. That woman died in a rented apartment with my father, I said. You're looking at what's left. As Julian left, my private line rang. It was an unknown number from the Dallas County Jail. I answered. Clara, the voice said. It wasn't Mark. It was Evelyn. I'm busy, Evelyn. I've already got your confession. You have a confession, dear, she said, her voice sounding strangely triumphant despite being behind bars. But you don't have the whole story. You think you're the only one with secrets? Ask Julian about the Sarah project. Ask him why he really introduced her to Mark. The line went dead. I looked at the door Julian had just walked through. Sarah. The mistress. She wasn't just a random woman Mark had found at a bar. She was an employee of Vane Tech. Julian hadn't just watched the Hendersons. He had curated their downfall. He had planted the mistress to trigger the divorce, to trigger the audit, to bring me to him. I wasn't the architect of this revenge. I was the centerpiece of his. I walked to the window and looked at my reflection. For the first time, I didn't see a billionaire. I didn't see a mouse. I saw a woman who was standing in the center of a maze, and the walls were starting to move. The strategy just escalated. The execution just got personal. And Julian Vane? He just became the next name on my list. Transparency is a funny thing. People think it means being seen. But in the world of power, transparency is a weapon. If you make the walls of your house out of glass, your enemies will spend all their time looking in, trying to find your secrets. They never realize that while they're staring at you, you're the one holding the remote to the floodlights. Wednesday morning. 10 a.m. The glass house was swarming with the world's media. They were here for the lithium reveal. They were here to see the billionaire housewife. Julian Vane was standing to my left, looking every bit the supportive partner. He thought he had me. He thought the Sarah revelation was a secret he could keep in his pocket for a rainy day. He didn't realize I don't wait for the rain. I create the storm. I stepped up to the podium. I wasn't wearing navy or black today. I was wearing white. Pure, blinding white. Thank you all for coming, I said. My voice was amplified, echoing through the glass halls and out into the Dallas morning. Today was meant to be an announcement about the future of energy in Texas. And it will be. But before we talk about the dirt, we need to talk about the blood. The room went silent. I saw Julian's posture stiffen out of the corner of my eye. For 7 years, I was married to Mark Henderson, I continued, looking directly into the main lens of the national news pool. A man who is currently in custody for fraud. But Mark didn't act alone. He was part of a legacy of theft that dates back 30 years. A theft that involved the mineral rights of my father, Thomas Smith. I clicked a remote in my hand. Behind me, on a massive LED screen, a document appeared. It wasn't the lithium survey. It was the internal payroll of Vane Tech from 6 months ago. And there, highlighted in red, was Sarah's name. Listed as a strategic liaison. And here, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a scream, is the proof that this betrayal was manufactured by my partner, Julian Vane. Julian stepped forward, his face a mask of practiced concern. Clara, I think there's a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Julian, I said, turning to him in front of the world. You planted Sarah to ruin my marriage so you could swoop in as the savior and secure the lithium rights your father couldn't steal from mine. You played the long game. But you forgot one thing. I clicked the remote again. I bought the debt of Vane Tech's primary subsidiary this morning, I said. Using the very funds you helped me recover from the Hendersons. In essence, Julian, you funded your own hostile takeover. As of this moment, I am the majority stakeholder in the very project you thought you were leading. And I am terminating our partnership for ethical breach, a clause you so graciously included in the contract last night. Julian's face didn't just turn pale, it turned hollow. He was a man who lived by the sword of the contract, and I had just run him through with it. You can't do this, Clara, he hissed, away from the mic. You'll tank the stock. You'll destroy both our empires. I don't care about the empire, Julian, I replied, leaning back into the microphone. I care about the truth. And the truth is, the Henderson-Vane era of Texas is over. Detective Miller? I called out. The detective stepped forward from the back of the room, flanked by 4 officers. They weren't heading for me. Julian Vane, the detective said, his voice booming. You're being detained for questioning regarding the Strategic Liaison Program and its involvement in the fraudulent inducement of land transfers. And we have a new warrant for your father's records regarding the Thomas Smith case. Julian didn't fight. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and genuine, terrifying respect. He knew he'd been outplayed by the very mouse he tried to use as a lure. You're going to be very lonely at the top, Clara, he said as they led him away. I've been lonely for 7 years, Julian, I said, watching his back. I'm used to the altitude. I turned back to the press. The room was in a frenzy, but I felt a strange, deep peace. The lithium rights will be placed into a public trust, I announced. Managed by the Thomas Smith Foundation. The Hendersons are gone. The Vanes are out. From this day forward, this land belongs to the people it was stolen from. I walked off the stage. I didn't take any questions. I didn't need to. I walked through the glass corridors of my building, past the statues and the art, until I reached the roof. My burner phone rang. It was the jail. Hello? Clara. It was Mark. His voice was broken, sounding like he'd been screaming for hours. I saw the news. They're taking Julian too. Please, if you're doing this to everyone, just tell me one thing. Did you ever really love me? I looked out over the city. I thought about the 7 years of lemon wax and pot roast. I thought about the girl who once believed in the boy with the ambitious eyes. I loved a man who didn't exist, Mark, I said. And you killed the woman who loved him. There's nothing left for either of us. I hung up. I dropped the phone from the edge of the building. The execution was complete. Mark was in a cage. Evelyn was a pariah. Julian was in ruins. I was standing on top of a billion-dollar empire, in a white dress, with the sun on my face. But as I looked down at my hands, I realized they were shaking. Not with fear. Not with regret. With the realization that for the first time in my life, I had nowhere to hide. The mask was gone. The mouse was dead. And now, I had to figure out who was left standing in the mirror. Because when you destroy everything that defined you, even the people you hated, you're left with a terrifying question. What do you do when the war is over, but you're still a soldier? If you think the victory is the end, you're wrong. The hardest part isn't the fight. It's the silence that comes after. They say that when a titan falls, the earth shakes for miles. But they don't tell you about the cracks that open up under everyone else's feet. I didn't just destroy a marriage or a law firm. I pulled the thread on a tapestry that held half of Dallas together. And as the colors began to bleed, I realized that I was the only one left holding the needle. Wednesday evening. 8 p.m. I was back in the Mouse House, our suburban home. It felt like a museum of a life I'd outgrown. The police tape was gone, but the air was still thick with the ghost of Evelyn's gin and Mark's desperation. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the news. My face was everywhere. The Smithames revelation, they were calling it. But the story was moving faster than I could control. The audit into Henderson and Associates hadn't just found Mark's fraud, it had uncovered a pay-to-play scheme involving 3 city council members and a state judge. The Hendersons weren't just a family. They were a knot. And I had cut it. My phone, my real phone, was melting with messages. Clara, we need to talk about the downtown zoning, one councilman texted. Mrs. Smithames, please reconsider the divestment from the regional bank, a lobbyist pleaded. I ignored them. I was watching a live feed of the Dallas County Jail. A riot of reporters was gathered outside. They weren't there for Mark anymore. They were there for the list. Evelyn had started talking. Not to save Mark. Not to save herself. She was talking to burn the city down. She was naming every name, every bribe, and every secret she'd held for 40 years. If she was going to a state ward, she was taking the Texas elite with her. A heavy knock came at my front door. Not the rhythmic bang of the police. This was a frantic, uneven pounding. I looked at the security monitor. It was the managing partner's wife, Lydia. She was still in her gala gown from the night before, now tattered at the hem. She was crying. I opened the door. You did this. Lydia screamed, stumbling into the foyer. My husband is in a cardiac ward. Our accounts are seized. My children are being mocked at school. Was it worth it, Clara? Just to get back at Mark, you destroyed 100 families who had nothing to do with your petty revenge. I stood there, my hands in the pockets of my silk robe. I felt a cold prickle of guilt, but it was buried under layers of scar tissue. Arthur wasn't an innocent bystander, Lydia, I said. He knew about the fraud. He helped Evelyn launder the charity funds through your summer home in Aspen. You lived in luxury on the backs of children who didn't get their scholarships. Don't come to me for sympathy. We were friends, she wailed. No, I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. I was your project. I was the woman you let sit at your table so you could feel superior. That's not friendship. That's a transaction. And the bill just came due. I watched her collapse onto the floor, the same floor I had polished for 7 years. I helped Lydia up and called a car to take her to her sister's. As the car pulled away, I realized the domino effect wasn't just about money. It was about the vacuum. Marcus called me 10 minutes later. Clara, we have a problem. The regional bank that held the Henderson debt? They're facing a run on their deposits. People are panicked. If they collapse, it's going to trigger a foreclosure wave across the North District. How much to stabilize them? I asked. 200 million, Marcus said. But Clara, that's your liquid reserve. That's the money for the lithium infrastructure. This was the true cost of power. To save the innocent people caught in the Hendersons' wake, I had to use the wealth I'd spent my life building. If I let the bank fail, I was as bad as Evelyn. If I saved it, I was bailing out the very system that had tried to kill me. Do it, I said. Buy the bank. Rebrand it as Smith Ames National. Tell the depositors their money is safe. But fire the entire board by midnight. I walked through the house, turning off the lights one by one. In the dark, the house felt like a tomb. I walked past Mark's office. I walked past the guest room that was supposed to be a nursery. I realized that in my quest to be the landlord of everyone else's life, I had become a ghost in my own. I had no one to call. Julian was in a cell. Mark was a monster. Evelyn was a demon. I was a billionaire with a billion-dollar problem, sitting in a 3-bedroom house that smelled like lemon wax. I went to the gardening shed. I pulled up the floorboard. I didn't reach for the laptop. I reached for a small, wooden box I'd kept hidden even deeper. Inside was a single photograph of my father. He was standing on the West Texas land, smiling, his face covered in red dust. "Is this what you wanted, Dad?" I whispered. "Is this the legacy?" The photo didn't answer. But the burner phone in the box did. It buzzed with a text from an encrypted number. "You think you've seen the last domino? Look at the Project Sarah files again." Julian wasn't the only one who hired her. I ran back to the house and pulled up the files Marcus had decrypted. I looked past Julian's name. I looked at the wire transfers for Sarah's strategic liaison's salary. The money hadn't just come from Vane Tech. Half of it had been funneled through a trust called the Rose Foundation. My heart stopped. The Rose Foundation was my grandmother's trust. The trust one had managed for 7 years. The trust one thought only I had access to. I looked at the access logs. Someone had been using my own money, from my own secret accounts, to pay the mistress to ruin my marriage. And the access code used wasn't mine. It was the legacy code I'd given to the one person I thought was dead. My father. If you thought you knew where this was going, you're as blind as I was. The war isn't over. It's just moved underground. They say grief is a journey. They don't tell you that sometimes the destination is a lie. I spent 20 years building a monument to a dead man. I turned myself into a weapon to avenge a father I thought was a martyr. But as I traced the digital breadcrumbs of the Rose Foundation, I realized that I wasn't the architect of my own revenge. I was just the final piece of someone else's puzzle. Thursday, 3 a.m. The glass house was silent, save for the hum of the servers. I was staring at the IP address associated with the Rose Foundation transfers. It wasn't in Dallas. It wasn't even in Texas. The signal was bouncing off a satellite and landing in a small, remote town in the Chihuahua Desert, just across the border. A place where the maps get fuzzy and the law is a suggestion. If this was what I thought it was, I had to face it alone. I drove for 6 hours. The sunrise was a jagged, bloody line across the horizon. As the skyscrapers of Dallas faded into the rearview mirror, I felt the chairwoman mask slipping. I was just Clara again. A daughter looking for the truth in the dirt. I reached the coordinates, a crumbling adobe ranch house surrounded by rusted oil derricks. It looked abandoned, a relic of a failed dream. But the satellite dish on the roof was brand new, its sleek white surface gleaming in the desert sun. I stepped out of the car. I didn't have a gun. I had something more dangerous, a decrypted file that proved the Rose Foundation had orchestrated every major tragedy of my life. The interior of the house was cool and dark. It smelled of old paper, ozone, and a very specific tobacco my father used to smoke. I knew you'd find the link, Clara, a voice said from the shadows of the back room. I just didn't think it would take you this long. You were always a bit too sentimental about the Hendersons. A man stepped into the light. He was older, his hair a shock of white, his skin leathered by the sun. But the eyes, those sharp, analytical blue eyes, were unmistakable. Thomas Smith. My father. I felt a cold, dead weight settle in my chest. You're alive, I whispered. Alive is a relative term, Clara, he said, walking to a wall of monitors that showed live feeds of the Dallas Stock Exchange, the county jail, and me. I've been the ghost in your machine for 20 years. I gave you the seeds of Aegis North. I leaked the geological surveys to Mark. I even picked Sarah out for him. She was always so easy to manipulate. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. You let me mourn you. You let me live in poverty. You watched me marry a man who treated me like garbage. You watched me suffer for 7 years. I watched you harden, Thomas corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. If I had stayed, you would have been soft. You would have been the mouse for real. I needed a partner to take back what the Hendersons stole. I needed someone who had nothing left but the drive to win. I didn't just give you an empire, Clara. I built you into one. He gestured to the monitors. The lithium deal? It's not about the money. It's about the control. With that deposit, we don't just own a mine. We own the future of the power grid. You and I, Clara, we're going to be the new landlords of the world. You paid Sarah, I said, stepping closer to him. You paid the woman who destroyed my life. You used my grandmother's name, your own mother's name, to fund the humiliation of your daughter. Thomas smiled. It was the same smile I saw in the mirror every morning. And it worked, didn't it? Look at where you are. You're the most powerful woman in Texas. You should be thanking me. I'm not thanking you, I said. I pulled my own tablet from my bag. I'm terminating you. Thomas laughed. You can't terminate me, Clara. I own the Rose Foundation. I own the back doors to Aegis North. I'm the one who wrote the code. You wrote the code 20 years ago, Dad, I said, my fingers flying across the screen. But I'm the one who's been maintaining it. While you were hiding in the dirt, I was learning the modern world. I found your Rose partition 3 hours ago. And I didn't just find it. I locked it. Thomas's smile faded. He turned to his monitors. The screens began to flicker. What are you doing? He hissed. I'm transferring the Rose Foundation assets to the state's Victim Compensation Fund, I said. And I'm sending your coordinates to the FBI. They've been looking for the person behind the Henderson fraud for a while now. I think the ghost of Thomas Smith will make a much more interesting headline than a crooked lawyer. You'd send your own father to prison? Thomas was shaking now, his composure finally shattering. My father died 20 years ago, I said, walking toward the door. You're just another predator who underestimated the mouse. Thomas lunged for the monitors, trying to override my commands. But it was too late. The system was dead. The ghost was being purged. Clara! You need me, he screamed. Without me, you're just a girl with a big bank account. You don't know the people I've dealt with. You won't survive the next week. I survived 7 years with Mark and Evelyn, I said, stopping at the screen door. I looked back at the man who had shaped my life into a weapon. I think I'll be just fine. I walked out. The desert was vast and silent. As I drove away, I saw the first dust cloud of the FBI SUVs on the horizon. The Hendersons were gone. Julian Vane was in ruins. And now, the man who started it all was finally meeting the monster he created. I looked in the rearview mirror as the ranch house became a tiny dot in the sand. I was finally, truly alone. But as the sun hit the windshield, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a signal. I wasn't following a script. I was the one driving. The war was over. The ghosts were buried. Now, it was time to see what a billion-dollar empire looks like when it's built on the truth. They say that when you seek revenge, you should dig 2 graves. I dug 4. One for Mark, one for Evelyn, one for Julian, and one for the ghost of my father. I thought that by the end, I would be standing in a cemetery. But as I look out over the horizon today, I realize I wasn't digging graves. I was digging a foundation. 1 month later, I was standing on the balcony of the glass house. The chaos of the Henderson scandal had settled into a grim, permanent record. The news cycle had moved on, but the lives I had dismantled were still in pieces. Mark had been sentenced to 12 years. Evelyn was facing 15. Julian Vane was tied up in a decade's worth of litigation that would eventually strip him of his company. And my father? He was awaiting trial in a federal facility, refusing to speak to anyone but his lawyers. The world knew my name now. Clara Smith Ames. The woman who broke the Dallas elite. Marcus entered the room. He looked tired, but satisfied. The Thomas Smith Foundation is fully funded, he said, laying a final set of documents on the table. The lithium mine begins operations next week under the new Environmental Oversight Committee. The profits are already being diverted to the regional scholarships. And the house? I asked. The Henderson estate has been raised, Marcus replied. The park is open to the public as of this morning. Children are playing on the spot where Evelyn used to host her mimosas. I felt a ghost of a smile. Good. There's one last piece of business, Clara, Marcus said, his voice turning soft. Mark's final appeal for a visitation was denied. But he sent a letter. He wants to know if you'll keep the wedding ring. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small gold band. It felt heavy, a lead weight of a memory. I walked to the edge of the balcony. Tell him he doesn't need to worry about the ring, I said. I let it go. I watched it fall, a tiny, gold spark that vanished into the city traffic below. It didn't make a sound. It didn't matter. I spent the afternoon at the Foundation's new headquarters. It wasn't a fortress of glass and steel. It was a refurbished library in the heart of the district where my father had grown up. I walked through the halls, watching young engineers and researchers working on the next generation of energy. They didn't know who I was. To them, I was just the donor. The lady in the quiet suit. I sat in a chair by the window, watching the sunset. I realized then that I had spent 7 years defined by what I wasn't. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't a mouse. I wasn't a victim. But now, for the first time, I had to decide what I was. I wasn't just a billionaire. I was a guardian. I was the person who ensured that the next Thomas Smith, the next brilliant mind from the dirt, didn't have to disappear to survive. My phone buzzed. A new message from an unlisted number. The board is ready for you, Madam Chairwoman. The global summit starts in an hour. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I didn't look at a mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who was standing there. Before I go, I want to thank you. For watching the mouse become the lion. For staying through the blood and the dirt. My story isn't a fairy tale. It's a blueprint. There are people in your life right now who think you're a background character. They think they can use you, overlook you, or write your ending for you. Let them. Let them believe they're winning. Let them build their houses of glass. Because when the time is right, you won't need to shout. You won't need to make a scene. You'll just need to tell the truth. And the truth is the most expensive thing in the world. I walked out of the library and into the evening air. The car was waiting. Marcus held the door open. "Where to, Clara?" I looked at the road ahead. It was long, winding, and completely open. "Everywhere," I said. "Thank you for following the journey of the architect of ruin." If you've learned anything from my story, let it be this: never underestimate the person who has nothing to lose and everything to prove. Subscribe for the next narrative. Comment below, now that the war is over, what would you do with Clara's empire? Until next time, stay sovereign.